All right, so we just heard from Will Heegard, the Director of Operations with the Footprint Project, and they have done some amazing work after natural disasters in the field. And one of the things that he said really struck me,
Hmm.
and it was survival is a team sport.
It was amazing to hear, not just the sort of nuts and bolts of how a disaster response program like Footprint, and there are many others out there that do that work in communities in the wake of natural disasters, and sort of hearing about how that actually plays out is, I think, really fascinating and important for people to hear. But he brought a sort of a level of community to it that I think speaks to what all of us need to recognize, which is that it is a team sport. It's an entire community that has to sort of respond in these situations, and that we can learn from one another and get a better handle on, when town A has dealt with a hurricane and town B is facing, a wildfire. Like, there are lessons to be learned here, and I think when organizations like Footprint are connecting those dots and helping, take lessons learned from one place and apply them to another, that's how we can respond more thoughtfully and more quickly.
Solar and storage are the difference between life and death in a lot of these
Yeah,
communities. And what the Footprint Project is doing is for all intents and purposes, saving lives
totally. Yeah,
in places like Hawaii and North Carolina and other places where there's natural disasters. So
yeah.
give it a listen. It's really important to hear what you can get done in 72 hours after a natural disaster hits. I first came across Footprint Project after the Hawaii fires, and I wondered if you could just tell us what happened. Tell us what happened in Hawaii, how Footprint Project showed up to help the community after that time.
Yeah. Our Maui response started in many ways like most of our responses that we engage in, where we got a request. This time it came on through Instagram, but we saw the news. If we were kind of like, as many people were on the mainland US, kind of just in shock of how tragic and the
Right.
scope and scale of the devastation. And we were kind of I remember sitting in my living room in New Orleans and looking at Jamie, our program director, and who's also my wife, just to be, transparent. We were like sitting around at the dinner table and we're like, oh wow, this is really tragic and bad. Like, this is just, it's, everyone was watching the news. It was just brutal.
Yeah.
And we were like, well, we're in New Orleans. All of our equipment is kind of in mainland US. We don't really have a fleet. We don't have a lot to offer Hawaii. A lot of these
Hmm.
microgrids are not going to land in time, right? And right as we were kind of thinking, like, is there anything we can do? What could we do? How could we engage? You know, we were monitoring our Instagram, and we got an Instagram message from uh a contact who had heard of us, or was gotten in, basically learned about us from a friend who we had worked with in Louisiana after Hurricane Ida. And
Mm.
they had said it was the Honolulu Hot Sauce Company.
Oh, wow.
Hmm.
The Instagram message came in and it was, I am on Maui. My business just burned down. I have heard you guys do help with solar and energy and disasters. We have no power. Can you help?
Hmm.
And
Wow.
we kind of looked at that message and we were watching the news and we were like, how do we respond? Like, how,
Yeah.
and we basically, it was, hey, how do we find the right sites that are going to be viable for rapid community resilience hub pop-ups that can be the right fit for microgrid technologies that are in the region. So while Jamie
Hmm.
was kind of helping with the coaching on the client side, as we would consider it, so the folks that, the individuals that we were starting to work with in Maui, I was emailing. I think I got connected to Green Tech Hawaii and some folks at Sunrun, and in about a period of like less than 72 hours, we had figured out that Sunrun employees could had Tesla Powerwalls
Hmm.
in Honolulu, in on the Big Island, and they that weekend could assemble them on into palletized mobile microgrids, and
Wow.
we had sites that could receive them for pop-up that were going to be running generators for fridges and Starlinks, and because communications is always a massive, one of the
Hmm.
first things that needs power, right? People can't talk, the comms are all down, the cell towers are down. So we had kind of triangulated, hey, the Sunrun team can assemble these, can donate and assemble these Tesla Powerwall units. We have folks in Maui, industry partners, and both Sunrun and some other installer partners that could support the drop off and racking of the arrays. And we were within like 2 weeks, we had 5 sites up with these microgrids. And I think there
It's
was
incredible.
probably more by that time. I got to look at the notes, but it was very like we kind of played a remote. We didn't put anybody on a plane. For the first 2 weeks, it was just us working, calling, you know, Ben from Green Tech Maui, and then the Sunrun, Blake from Sunrun, and these, kind of coaching them as volunteer deployment partners and getting these, matchmaking with these on the ground sites requesting equipment. And
Hmm.
it was one of the first times we had ever kind of played that, like, we're going to try to do this all without getting someone to the ground, which was a very, for us, it was a huge exercise in trust, and also it was a huge exercise in trust for our corporate and industry partners, and also vice versa. The
Hmm.
folks on the ground in Maui were trusting us to try to, you know to do what we do best and kind of play this matchmaking role between the industry, the solar energy or microgrid energy industry that is looking for a way to help, and these direct on the ground, folks that are in kind of going through the worst period, in many cases, the worst
Hmm.
thing they've ever seen in their communities, in their recent history. And we're all trusting each other to try to do the right thing. And
Hmm.
it was a Yeah, I mean, every disaster is I think, for me, I've been doing this now for coming up on 10 years, and it's a it's a unique roller coaster of tragedy, and then seeing the best parts of humanity kind of come
Hmm.
together. And for me, I don't know, I just find it very meaningful that there is this role that renewable energy technology partners, industry partners can play that has never really been an option before, right? Like, we usually think of solar and batteries as large, on the roof or in the parking lot, the ship, or in the utilities domain. And in this case, it is really truly emergency energy access as a critical service. And
Hmm.
folks, when you're running a generator to power a insulin fridge in a health clinic where the lights, your Wi-Fi's down, your cell towers are down, and if that generator dies, your patients suffer. The microgrid technologies that the SIA partners can bring to the table are truly life-saving.
Well, was there any other energy source available at that time?
Gas generators, I mean, that's your
That's
option.
it.
Yeah.
That's it. And under those circumstances.
And that's
And in,
every single disaster, right? The grid goes down. I mean, I'm not faulting the utility. They lift, they move mountains to get the poles back up.
Hmm.
Um, I mean, what the responsibility for these fire, that's a different question. That's really not our space. We don't work in that space, but while they're trying to get the poles back up, if you're in the area and you don't have grid power, and this is literally anywhere, and if you don't have you either have a microgrid, right, already installed that wasn't affected by the fire, or you're lucky enough that you're pulled in, burned down, and the utility is somehow still serving, sending electrons through that wire. But if those two things don't exist, you are running a generator or you're sitting in the dark.
Hmm.
hmm
Hmm.
Good
This
point.
is 2025. That is the case in every single disaster in the domestic US. It's true globally. Like this is, I feel like we're in the microgrid space or the energy space so used to thinking about like all these other options, but the reality is we have so far to go to ensure the most vulnerable of us have access to, can call their loved ones, can keep their phone charged, can keep their insulin cold, can run their electric wheelchair, can get down the elevator, right? Can get down their wheelchair lift. Like
Yeah.
we have so far to go to ensuring that is those things are possible without a 5 gallon tank of gas and you know, Home Depot generator. And that is the truly in most places of the world, the only solution if the grid is down or if there's no grid at all. And
Hmm.
that causes carbon monoxide deaths. It causes massive costs, right? Like after Hurricane Ida, we were working with site partners that were saying we're sending a team of 2 people in a truck 3 hours into Mississippi to get to wait 5 hours in line for gas just to get, we do that every 2 days to keep our, you know, fridge cold for the entire community center that's serving the entire community, right? Like
Hmm.
I until you've been through that scenario, I think a lot of people just don't realize how reliant we are on energy for modern human survival
Hmm.
and how quickly it becomes one of the most necessary items when you don't have it guaranteed through your grid interconnect.
I don't want to belabor the point because I think you've touched on this already, but when we think about sort of the other end of the equation from the gallon, the 5 gallons of gas and the generator, what is it about sort of solar and storage technology and some of these microgrid applications that you use that makes it so uniquely usable and valuable in these situations? What is it, how does that kind of translate in real time in terms of like speed and ability to really meet the needs that you just described?
I think about resilience I take a very practical, we are not purists, right? We take a very
Mm-hmm.
practical approach to power or energy access in emergencies, right?
Mm-hmm.
If a like I remember showing up to the AB Tech, uh, it was a, designated shelter site. It was Sunday after Helene devastated Asheville, and there was about 40 people. It was designated as the place to go if you can get yourself out and you have medically vulnerable energy, like if you need a plug for oxygen, you're any medically vulnerable or electrical dependent device.
Mm-hmm.
And there was 40, I remember walking into that shelter and there was 2 gas generators outside, these 5 kilowatt small Home Depot ones with maybe 5 extension cords plugged into each one, running into the main building entryways. Like this is a
Mm-hmm.
standard, like a university building, right? And
Mm-hmm.
inside that building, there was 40 people on hospital beds with volunteer doctors that had just shown up to help. And they were all running, oxygen concentrators, CPAPs, folks that have cerebral palsy or other,
Mm-hmm.
just conditions that require a breathing device. And when like our role, they didn't know when were going to get gas. And that was the big scary part.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I say that because we didn't show up and say, all right, just heads up, we're going to just unplug all of your generators and we're going to plug it into our mobile microgrid here. Like, no, we don't mess with something that's working, right?
Mm-hmm.
Particularly if it's, you know, critically medical dependent electricity, meaning if those generators stop or if we unplugged it, someone would start to go into respiratory distress, could potentially go into respiratory arrest and die, right? Like we don't mess with that. The If it's working, we don't break it, right? We don't try to fix something that's not broken. But for when I think of those types of sites, that that medical director, the person that was running that medically, you know, um, accessibility shelter,
Mm-hmm.
any backup source of electricity. It could have been a hydrogen generator. It could have been someone riding a bike to charge a plug, right? It doesn't matter. Any any backup to, hey, these two generators have one tank of gas left. We're trying to get through the night, and we don't
Mm-hmm.
know if the National Guard is showing up. Literally any sort of electrical backup is all it does is mean that they can breathe a little bit easier
Yeah.
through that scenario. And so for most of our sites are not as intense as that site or those types of sites, right? But that's in my mind, that's true. That's the definition of resilience. Like the tech that SIA partners and manufacturers and installers and all the distributors, all the network of industry groups that come together to make what SIA is, what the solutions you all provide are a backbone to existing energy infrastructure. And even if it's not the primary, in many cases it is for our less intense sites, right? There's, people still using portable solar generators in Western North Carolina for recovery sites to power their RVs or to reduce, just displace. They're spending 20 to 30 bucks a day on gas for their generator because they're living in a tiny home 50 feet away on their friend's farmland and they can't
Mm-hmm.
trench a line. So, there's these conditions where it's like it's just a cost savings offset for someone that doesn't have any more money and has just been through, lost everything. So
Right.
there's those sites, but where it's just saving money and reducing costs. But for these really, in the early response days, I'm thinking about Maui within the first week, or Helene in the first week. Those sites where people are critically dependent on fuel, that supply chain is life and death, right? If that fuel doesn't
Yeah.
show
Mm-hmm.
up, or if that generator stalls and there's no generator tech available, the only available power source goes out.
Mm-hmm.
So any battery, solar, any alternate wind, like it doesn't, we are agnostic, right? It doesn't matter, but a backup is like the definition of resilience is for us is multiple sources of access to things that keep you alive, right? And
Mm-hmm.
in my mind, the technology that SIA members provide is it's a tool in responders toolkit that they've never known is available before, and many of them have never touched, seen, or played with, and it's always been fields of solar panels on a highway that they drive by, right? It's never been panels on in front of the fire station to keep that fire station's radios
Right.
on, the fridge on, and the Starlink on for weeks when their generator has been running for more than 72 hours and has a maintenance issue, right? Which happens
Mm-hmm.
all the time in
Mm-hmm.
massive, large scale power outage disasters.
Will, you've made such a great point that when you pair solar and storage, you essentially have the power to stand up an energy source anywhere, and the difference is really life and death. Given all the things that you've seen in your job and the wonderful work you've done to stand up the Footprint Project, is there any advice that you'd give local government officials or people in policy roles or leadership positions for how to stand up their communities in the right way to I don't think it's possible to disaster proof anywhere because you can have fires, you can have tornadoes, you can have hurricanes, et cetera, et cetera. So any advice that you'd give to mitigate the damage in a natural disaster or how to respond quickly?
The more that local governments and local emergency management professionals can learn from communities that have already gone through this or are currently going through it. And then being really open. My other piece of advice would just be open to creative solutions
Mm-hmm.
because the disaster response and emergency management space is similar to the military or other kind of traditionalist institutions. They're hesitant to change. They have lots of momentum behind, hey, we do this thing because we know it works. And it's kind of that, what is that? I don't know if it's a Einstein quote or whatever, but like doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result is
Right.
the definition of what insanity or something like that. The idea that in a rapidly changing ground context in communities that are all frontline now in the US, expecting that we can do the same thing and not face consequences is
Hmm.
a recipe for uh, a disaster becoming a tragedy. Because, and I'm taking a quote from Malik Rahim, a local living legend in New Orleans, who says, a disaster is, we face disasters all the time. They become tragedies when we're not prepared, right?
Yeah.
When we aren't learning from the folks that have already been through it, when we aren't making good decisions about how we keep our neighbors and the most vulnerable around us alive and safe through these major, in many cases, power outage events.
Hmm.
And so I think learning from the people that have been through it and then being open to creative solutions in an era where things are rapidly changing is the only way we're going to get through the next decade, 2 decades, 3 decades. I'm going to be 60 years old in 2050. And if I am lucky enough to have kids, they will live, and they're lucky, they will live till 2100. Like, this is not that far away. And we are already living through massive, massive recurring disasters that we need to be prepared for.
We want to let you get back to all the important work that you're doing, but maybe we could just wrap a little by thinking about maybe what's in store for the Footprint Project. You've mentioned you're scaling up, you're adding staff, you're sort of building out new lines of business to not just focus on immediate emergency response, but build more resilient infrastructure. So where do you see the work going? What do you think is up next? And is there anything that that our audience here at SIA or in the industry at large can do to help out?
Oh man, I think it's a very unique time to be doing this work, both on the humanitarian side of things where USAID and the international,
Hmm.
humanitarian budgets are being cut, FEMA and traditional national, domestic institutions are being jeopardized left and right. And then the renewable energy, industry is also being, gutted effectively. So it's hard for me to give clear vision. I think a lot of us are just like, how do we get through? Like, how do we survive, one day at a time, which is totally valid. Um, Standard asks from the industry are always, if you can afford to and contribute cash, it's the most effective, flexible, sustainable way of supporting disaster affected communities. All the research shows that. Center for Disaster Philanthropy, a fantastic institution, has a lot of good research on why donating, cash or investing cash into humanitarian relief orgs allows them to spend it in the affected regions, so jumpstarts local economies, allows us to support the local installers that were,
Right.
hire them to do the work instead of spending it on moving pallets of panels from California to, let's say, North Carolina or North Carolina to LA, right? Like there's a lot of
Yeah.
reasons why the cash is king mentality in disasters is so scientifically true. Um, and then if and we know that's not viable for a lot of groups, we are trying to upcycle and incorporate donated in-kind equipment, and we
Hmm.
love to incorporate used, functional, effective, safe technologies that a rural firefighter or a community group can plug into. So if there's that type of inventory in your warehouse and you're looking to offload it ahead of the next storm, we would love to talk. And then I don't know, like the last thing, and I've said this many times, I'll say it again, like talk to your local fire station. Like
Mm.
know your neighbor that is on a medically vulnerable or medically dependent device. Like this is backyard work. It is not doesn't have to be fancy, it doesn't have to be sexy, but if your power goes out, know your plan, know your like look at the evacuation plans, know the storms that are coming in your region, and do the work. Like
Hmm.
this is a survival's a team sport, and we're not going to do this. We don't do anything alone.
Well, we really appreciate you coming here to tell your story. I certainly feel like there's going to be a special place in heaven reserved for you and your team, because you are doing amazing work to bring energy to communities that need it at the hardest, most impossible times for them. So, thanks for taking a few minutes out of your day to tell us about that. We certainly want to keep telling your story. We want to be supportive of you, to the extent possible, and just would love to keep the conversation going as you continue doing this work.
Thank you so much for elevating the story. It's
Yeah.
definitely a team effort, and we are so grateful for Sia and all the partners that we work with that are your, under y'all's umbrella. We don't do it without industry, and y'all are, at the forefront of a lot of the technology that we're going to need to get through the coming storms.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks so much, Will. Good luck out there.
Yeah, talk soon.